Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I wanted to make a video quickly here about something again that came up in a conversation with someone. When you go into a wave, does it make you feel better or worse to try to connect it to something? And again, this came up in a conversation with someone, and my own opinion on this is it depends on the person. And actually, before I get into this topic, I wanted to say that on my last video, I had talked about the morning anxiety, the heightened morning symptoms, and how my own opinion was that it was due to cortisol and an imbalance in cortisol. So naturally, it's highest in the morning and earliest in the evening, lowest in the evening. But in this situation, it's exaggerated, or it seems exaggerated. And I had said maybe a 4-point cortisol test would be worth getting. And I had said that I had never had one, but someone commented that they had one and it never showed anything, which is not very surprising because most tests show nothing in this. But it also goes to show that not everybody is the same, because I have a friend in withdrawal who's better now. She took cortisol lowering supplements and it really helped her symptoms. Maybe it was a placebo effect. Maybe different things are different for different people. Maybe her cortisol was high and this person's is not. It's, again, one of those things that doesn't make a ton of sense in this journey, but just thought I would mention that. So this whole thing about waves, I remember when I was feeling really bad, I had several close friends in withdrawal, and one of them said to me, Melissa, waves always have a trigger. And every time I would feel bad or feel worse than usual, he would say, what did you do? What did you eat? Did you use any chemicals? Did you clean your house with bleach? Did you do this, that? And it would kind of drive me crazy. And he's like, waves always have a trigger. And I'm like, but do they? And it was always something that we debated. And I don't know, do they always have to have a trigger? I'm not sure. But a lot of times when you have a worsening, you will try to figure out what happened to you. So in my conversation with this person about this topic, I said that since my timeline was so weird, and I had in my first withdrawal, my symptoms disappear at 6 months and go away for 7 and then come back again for 18. I remember searching for years after that, my expense reports, my journals, everything I had ever written down, to try to figure out what happened. Like, why did my symptoms come back, and why did they last so long that second time? And I never did figure out what the cause was. My best guess is that I was having stress at the time. But if you followed my journey, I didn't really have the windows and waves pattern at all in my first withdrawal, except if you count the 6 month, 7 month, 18 month thing as windows and waves. I don't know, it's not really typical. And so stress is a big trigger of waves, but I didn't consider myself in that pattern. So it still kind of perplexes me, but I boil it down to the stress of my life at the time. And it nearly drove me crazy trying to figure out why that happened. And when I was having this conversation with this person, I said, because they were like, could it have been this? And I said, I've heard absolutely everything under the sun triggering people's waves, although what I've seen is as the most common 4 things. I know I made a video about the most common 3 things, but really there's 4, I would say. And that would be stress, female hormones, more triggering medications, and COVID/sickness. COVID is being the main one in that COVID sickness one combination. But I've heard all kinds of different things under the sun triggering people's worsening of symptoms. And I said to that person, I think it depends on how you perceive it, because some people, if they know, like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, it actually kind of puts them at ease, because they'll say, excuse me, they'll say, I'm feeling horrible. I feel like I feel worse than ever. And they want to try to figure that out. It gives them some peace of mind. And then there's other people who, once their brain has kind of attached on or latched onto something, then they become even more hypervigilant. So say the person was trying to find meaning in the wave, and the last thing that happened was they were around smoke, say, and they're like, I'm pretty sure that's what triggered it. Me, as someone who talks to people sometimes, like still, even though I'm not formally coaching, I'll say, yes, it's possible that that triggered it, but it might not have been that. And this person's reaction was, that makes me feel worse hearing that. So they actually wanted to attach it to something. But other people, again, if they have learned or convinced themselves or are pretty sure that the trigger was smoke, then they'll be hyper vigilant in when they go out. Is there anybody smoking? Is there anybody smoking? And they can't really be present in the moment at all because they're constantly on the lookout for someone who might be smoking in order to run in the other direction. And that might be okay if it's only one thing, but if it starts becoming a huge issue where every time there's any worsening of symptoms, they are looking around and they're starting to label things safe and dangerous that maybe aren't, that can become a problem. And then people will become holed up in their home. And then if they have a wave while they're around no known triggers, then they become afraid of life itself. I've seen that happen. And I've seen people become incredibly despaired by that. So my answer to that is, it depends. My answer to do waves always have a trigger, or should I always be looking for a trigger? Well, that depends. I think that if you notice very consistently something triggering you over and over and over, like for instance, females in their monthly cycle, say a couple of days before their period, that's a trigger. Obviously you can't stop that, but just kind of to mentally be prepared for that, then I would say, okay, that's consistent. But if it's a one-off thing, again, if it helps you to kind of make sense of it and that calms you down, good, because what you're trying to do regardless is calm your system down. And so for me, I was searching, like, even in hindsight, when I had that weird pattern, what could it have possibly been? And it nearly drove me crazy because I wanted to figure it out and put it into a neat little box. And as you know, in this experience, most things don't fit into a neat box. It's very messy. Healing can be very messy and non-linear, as we know. So I think too that, and I've seen, like, people who tend to have more, I would say, mental symptoms can really fall victim, I guess, for lack of a better word, of attaching how they're feeling to everything around them. And then they can really start avoiding, and that can put the hypervigilance even higher. And that's not straight across the board for everybody, but I have noticed somewhat of a pattern in people who really tend to be much more of ruminators, and they need to make sense of it. They need that certainty. Maybe they had some OCD before. I did. They like certainty. They want to know for sure what happened. And so that it can be good to try to figure that out, but it can quickly go too far, if that makes sense. And ultimately what we're trying to do is become less reactive, less hypervigilant, and it depends a lot on our perception. And another thing I said to this person was, you could try to use this experience as an exposure, meaning so in OCD recovery, exposure is basically you're trying to expose yourself to things that create uncertainty, and then you're using your coping skills to work through that, rather than, again, I would expose myself to this, or this is dangerous. Like, I can't walk past a knife in the kitchen because then I get the thoughts. And so they avoid. So exposure would be either purposefully walking past them and trying to control our reactions, or if it just happens out and about somewhere, like in a store, treating that as an exposure and using our coping skills. So it's kind of the same thing, where it might have been the smoke, it might not have been, but kind of talking yourself through this, like, I don't know exactly what caused this reaction. It could be the smoke. It might have been random because the windows and waves pattern is really common throughout nervous system recovery. And so I'm going to use this as an exposure. Okay, I don't know for sure, but the uncertainty is driving me crazy. So I'm going to just use my coping skills and work my way through this as best as I can, rather than having to know for sure that that's what it was, because again, it can become this trap. And so that's the way that I kind of talked them through this. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. Are you someone who wants to know what triggered it, or does that make you more anxious? And this is a really interesting topic because I've had so many conversations about this with so many people. And again, it really depends on the person and their perception of it. And I've seen it go both ways. And I have a really good friend in this journey who has been in this a long time and has come a very, very long way, very severe case, and was someone who was always trying to figure it out, always trying to figure it out. This is a trigger, now I have to avoid this. This is a trigger, this is a trigger, and ended up living in their car for a time, and then kind of got to a point where they were like, I'm sick of this. Like, I need to start sort of standing up to this in some ways, and I need to get some quality of life back or I'm not going to make it. And so it was a lot of trying to work through and do these exposures. This all ties into that lulling and pushing that I've talked about before, the nurturing and the stretching, because you want to do all the self-care. And this friend that I'm talking about had a lot of coping skills that they had garnered over many years, and a lot of that was mental work, and it didn't take away the symptoms, but it helped them to kind of expose themselves to all the things that they had labeled dangerous, which had put them in their car, and just be like, I need to cope through this. And maybe not paradoxically, but what ended up happening is that the triggers became less and less and less. Does this happen naturally over time? Yes, but also part of it can be that pushing and that pulling back, like I've talked about so many times on this channel, and using some of those experiences as exposures. I often will tell people to think about it from the perspective of, if you were exposed to that thing and you were totally healthy, would you be someone who would just be like, you know what, I don't want to be around smoke, I'm going to leave? Because if you are, or you think that you would be that person, then leave. But are you avoiding it and becoming hypervigilant because you're scared it's going to trigger a wave? Then you have to think about how you're going to perceive that and move forward through it. Do you want to avoid it and become afraid of it and it ruin every single outdoor event? Or do you want to be like, you know what, this isn't something I would be afraid of if I was healthy or move away from, and so I'm going to use it as an exposure and maybe be around it for a little while and then leave, and then do it a little bit longer the next time and then leave. That's like that gradual exposure and pulling back. So let me know if this makes sense to you. Oops. And it can be hard sometimes to categorize these things, because obviously what triggers one person won't trigger another, whether you're healthy or whether you're in this journey. So it is a fine line, but I always say, try to think about it from the perspective of, if, I waved a magic wand and you were healthy, is this something you would avoid? And if they say yes for overall health, then it's like, okay, then don't expose yourself to it now either. If it's something that you'd be like, no, I wouldn't even think twice about it if I was feeling well, then maybe you could use it as a way to expose yourself to it even briefly, cope through it, and then pull back. But again, if it's very consistently a trigger for you, then you want to have some common sense about it and be like, obviously this is just not good for me at this time. I'm going to choose to not expose myself to it, or leave if I am randomly exposed to it, but maybe in the future I'll try again and see how it goes. So this whole thing is an art. It really is, and it's very individual. So let me know if this makes sense. Let me know if you guys how your Christmas holiday season is going. I know that can be triggering to think about the holidays. A lot of people seem to be in waves right now, and that's likely from the stress of the holiday season. Maybe not. But just as we know, stress is a big trigger of waves. So again, is this something where you want to just pull back and avoid everything completely? Or just try to do some pacing through it? Just maybe attend one party and have a time limit, 1 hour, and then I leave. And I've coached people very regularly who did this exact type of thing. Year 1, avoided Christmas entirely. Year 2, you do a little bit of go for a limited amount of time and then leave. Then year 3, or even if it's parties scattered throughout the year, doing this type of thing and building that kind of confidence and resiliency. And I've seen it work wonders for people. So anyway, I'll leave you guys with that. I hope you are having an okay Christmas season, and I'll see you next time. Bye.